I was working with the biggest egotistical asshole I'd ever met in my life. I'm not in the series anymore. And they said, Erik, had you fired? I said, what do you mean? How did he do that?
Two cops, one highway, a nation hooked. John Baker and Frank Poncherello rode into America's heart on chips. Their camaraderie as real as the California sun. Or so fans thought. At 78, Larry Wilcox breaks his silence, exposing a truth sharper than any siren. Their brotherhood was a lie. From egos to a near-fatal crash, this is his journey from resentment to redemption. The Chips set was a stage, and Larry Wilcox was a master of playing his part. As John Baker, he was the rock, steady, disciplined, the kind of cop you'd trust with your life. Erik Estrada's Ponch was the fire, all charisma and charm, a magnet for every eye in the room. Together, they were electric. Fans tuned in every week to watch them banter through high-speed chases, pull kids from wrecked cars, and laugh under the California sun. The chemistry was undeniable, so natural it felt like a window into their real lives. Viewers wrote letters, begged for autographs, and named their dogs after John and Ponch. To them, Wilcox and Estrada were brothers, their bond as real as the highways they patrolled. But the truth was colder. From the first day on set, Wilcox felt the rift. He was a Marine veteran, forged in the fires of discipline and sacrifice. Duty was his compass. Ego was a stranger. Estrada, though, was a different beast. He strutted onto the lot like a peacock. Mirrors his constant companion, always checking his hair, his smile, his shine. He'd flirt with anyone who caught his eye, sometimes coaxing fans into his trailer, his charm a performance that never stopped. To Wilcox, it was jarring. Is this guy for real? He'd mutter to himself, watching Estrada preen. He'd never met someone so consumed by their own image. For a man raised on small-town values, where humility was currency, Estrada's swagger was a foreign language. Yet Wilcox knew the game. Hollywood wasn't about feelings, it was about delivering. The show wasn't his. It belonged to the fans, the crew, the network. So he made a vow: keep the peace, do the work, and don't let the friction show. Maybe it's him, maybe it's me, he thought. But I won't let it sink the ship. That mantra carried him through 5 grueling seasons. Every smile, every quip, every fist bump with Ponch was a performance, a truce forged in professionalism. Off camera, they barely spoke. The laughter stopped when the director yelled, "Cut!" But the cameras never caught the strain, and the fans never suspected. This was the hidden art of Chips. 2 men, worlds apart, crafting a friendship so convincing it fooled millions. Wilcox leaned on his Marine training, compartmentalizing his irritation like a soldier in the field. Estrada, for all his bravado, was a pro too, matching Wilcox's energy shot for shot. The result was magic, a buddy cop dynamic that defined a generation. But the cost was steep. Every day, Wilcox swallowed his frustration, burying it beneath the tan uniform. He'd drive home, the weight of unspoken words heavy in his chest, wondering how long he could keep it up. The fans saw heroes. He saw a daily test of endurance. 3 truths emerged from those years. First, chemistry is a craft, not a gift. You can sell love while feeling none. Second, professionalism is a shield. Wilcox's discipline kept the show alive, even as his patience frayed. Third, perception is a trick of the light. Fans saw warmth. Wilcox felt frost. Both were true, depending on where you stood. But carrying that secret came at a price. A quiet resentment that grew heavier with every episode. The turning point wasn't a script or a boardroom deal. It was a scream of rubber and steel. During a routine stunt in 1980, Estrada's motorcycle betrayed him. A high-side crash, one of the deadliest kinds, sent the bike flipping through the air, crushing him against a truck. The set became a war zone. Crew members froze, their shouts drowned by panic. Blood pooled on the asphalt. Wilcox, his marine instincts kicking in, was the first to react. He knelt beside Estrada, checking his pulse, stabilizing his neck, barking orders to keep the crowd back. Paramedics arrived, their faces grim. Estrada's sternum was shattered, his lungs drowning in blood, his aorta possibly torn. At the hospital, priests whispered last rites. No one thought he'd make it through the night. Wilcox stood vigil, adrenaline fading into dread. For all their tension, this was no longer about egos. It was life and death. He'd saved the man he could barely stand, not out of affection, but because it was right. Hours later, Estrada clung to life, his recovery a miracle that defied the odds. But survival wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new one. That crash didn't just break bones. It broke the fragile truce between them. Estrada's injuries gave him power. A second accident, Wilcox still wonders if it was staged, handed Estrada a legal sledgehammer. He sued MGM and NBC, claiming damages that could cripple the show. The timing was brutal. Chips was a cash cow, but only if it hit 6 seasons. 5 seasons meant a hit. 6 meant syndication, a goldmine of reruns that could fund empires. The network was desperate. Estrada, now a martyr and a star, held all the cards. His demands weren't just about money, they were about control. And one of those demands, whispered in boardrooms, was Wilcox's head. Wilcox learned the truth after a trip to Brazil in 1982. São Paulo greeted him like a god. 40,000 fans swarmed the airport, chanting his name, kids in tiny Chips uniforms waving homemade signs. For an hour, he was untouchable, a global icon bathed in love. But back in Los Angeles, his phone rang with a different story. NBC's cutting you loose, his agent said, voice flat. Estrada had pushed for his exit, and the network, staring at syndication dollars, folded. Wilcox had saved Estrada's life, yet here he was, discarded like a prop. The math was merciless. One star's leverage outweighed another's loyalty. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a gut punch to everything Wilcox believed in. 3 lessons burned into him that day. First, accidents aren't just accidents. They're pivots that rewrite careers. Second, fandom doesn't equal security. Brazil's love couldn't save him from Hollywood's spreadsheets. Third, heroism can be erased by ambition. Wilcox had knelt in Estrada's blood, only to be erased by his demands. The irony was a blade, and it cut deep. Most actors would have crumbled. Wilcox didn't. He was a Marine, a strategist, a man who knew the value of controlling the narrative. Being fired was a death sentence in Hollywood. Studios sniffed out weakness like sharks. If word leaked that NBC had axed him, his career would be tainted. So he moved fast. He called his PR firm, Rogers & Cowan, his attorney, Martin Leeds, and a trusted Los Angeles Times writer. Over lunch at a French bistro in the Valley, he spun a new story. He wasn't fired. He was leaving. The headline would read, "Larry Wilcox chooses to walk away from Chips." It was bold, a lie wrapped in dignity, but it worked. When the article hit, fans saw a man stepping into his future, not a victim pushed out the door. This was more than spin. It was survival. Wilcox understood Hollywood's unspoken rules. Perception is power. A well-crafted story could shield him from the stigma of being let go. He leaned into his small-town grit, refusing to play the wounded star. "I'm no one's casualty," he told himself. But the anger simmered beneath the surface. The punk in him, the kid from Wyoming who settled scores behind barns, wanted to confront Estrada, to demand answers. Instead, he channeled that fire into action. While Estrada basked in Chips's spotlight, Wilcox hustled. He produced Ray Bradbury Theater, circling the globe for 5 years. He secured the rights to Death of a Playmate, turning Dorothy Stratton's tragedy into a high-profile project. He wrote scripts, pitched shows, built a career not as an actor, but as a creator. Yet the wound lingered. Years later, a producer's confession ripped it open. "Larry, I was there when Estrada got you fired," Cy Sherrick said over coffee. The words were a match to dry grass. Betrayal, confirmed in blunt terms, burned anew. Wilcox had rewritten the headline, but he couldn't rewrite the truth. He'd been expendable, a pawn in a game of syndication and ego. The anger wasn't just about losing a job. It was about losing trust in Estrada, in Hollywood, in the idea that loyalty mattered. For 5 years, Wilcox carried that anger like a second skin. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet, corrosive, seeping into late-night drinks and circling thoughts. He'd replay the crash, the boardroom deals, the call from his agent. Estrada hadn't just clashed with him, he'd erased him. The man whose life Wilcox had saved had turned that moment into leverage, using it to secure his own throne. It wasn't fair, it wasn't right, and it ate at him. Resentment became a habit. A glass of whiskey turned into 2. Conversations with friends veered back to the betrayal. A story told too many times. Work kept him moving, producing, pitching, building. But when the world went quiet, the bitterness crept in. He'd lie awake, the hick in him itching for a fight, imagining a moment where he could face Estrada and settle it the old way. But the businessman in him knew better. Revenge wouldn't heal. It would destroy. Still, knowing that didn't make the anger vanish. 3 truths defined this chapter. First, resentment is a thief. It promises strength but steals peace. Second, endurance isn't healing. Wilcox had survived 5 seasons with Estrada, but surviving betrayal only kept the wound raw. Third, anger is a cage you build yourself. Estrada had moved on, basking in fame, while Wilcox was trapped by his own grudge. The question haunted him: are you going to carry this forever? The shift didn't come from an apology or a grand gesture. It came from a question Wilcox asked himself one sleepless night. What's this anger doing for you? The answer was brutal. Nothing. It wasn't making him happier, stronger, or freer. It was chaining him to a past he couldn't change. So he made a choice, not for Estrada, but for himself. He'd let it go. Not fake it, not perform it, but truly release it. He'd love on this guy, as he put it, not out of weakness, but out of a desire to be free. At fan conventions, Wilcox leaned into generosity. When Estrada soaked up the spotlight, Wilcox stepped back, smiling. If fans wanted Ponch's autograph, Wilcox pointed them to his trailer. If reporters fawned over Estrada's charm, Wilcox nodded along, no longer stung. It wasn't submission, it was liberation. The more he gave Estrada space, the lighter he felt. The grudge that had weighed him down began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet strength. He laughed more, connected with fans, and found joy in the Chip's legacy without the shadow of resentment. Forgiveness didn't erase the past. Wilcox still remembered the crash, the firing, the betrayal, but those memories no longer carried venom. They were chapters, not chains. By seeing Estrada not as a rival, but as a man shaped by his own battles, a Harlem kid fighting for survival in a cutthroat world, Wilcox found empathy. Estrada's swagger wasn't just ego, it was armor, built from a life where trust was scarce. Understanding that didn't excuse the hurt, but it explained it, and that was enough. The twist? Forgiveness saved Wilcox more than Estrada. It freed him to love his work, his fans, his life. He could stand on a convention stage, tell old Chip stories, and mean the smile on his face. The feud was gone, not because Estrada changed, but because Wilcox did. For decades, Wilcox stayed silent. Fans speculated, tabloids whispered, but he let the reruns play. Let the myth breathe. Why break that silence at 78? Because time changes the lens. In the 1980s, speaking out would have fueled a tabloid fire, pitting him against Estrada in a war of headlines. Anger would have clouded his words. Pride would have sharpened them. But at 78, Wilcox sees clearly. He doesn't need revenge or validation. His legacy, as John Baker, as a producer, as a man, is secure. Now, his story isn't about settling scores. It's about setting the record straight. 3 reasons drive him. First, timing is wisdom. By waiting, Wilcox ensures his words land as lessons, not weapons. Second, fans deserve truth. They loved John and Ponch, and Wilcox respects them enough to share what really happened, not to ruin the show, but to deepen their understanding. Third, he's speaking for the next generation. Young actors, artists, anyone facing betrayal or ego clashes, they need a roadmap. Wilcox's story is that map. Endure, forgive, move forward. There's a simpler reason, too. Peace. Silence was as heavy as anger. By telling his story, Wilcox releases the final weight. He doesn't bash Estrada. He praises his talent, his charisma, his love for entertaining. But he's done carrying the myth alone. Hollywood isn't just glamour. It's politics, math, sacrifice. Wilcox wants fans to see that truth, not to sour their nostalgia, but to honor it with honesty. Larry Wilcox doesn't want to be remembered as the man who fought Erik Estrada. He wants to be the man who rose above it. Chips was a chapter, not his whole story. He's a Marine, a producer, a creator who turned betrayal into reinvention. He saved a life, lost a job, and found peace. Not because of what others did, but because of what he chose. That's the lesson he offers. Your legacy isn't what happens to you. It's how you respond. Estrada was his rival, but also his teacher. The clashes forged Wilcox's resilience, his business savvy, his capacity for forgiveness. Letting go wasn't weakness. It was victory. At 78, Wilcox stands tall, not as John Baker, but as Larry, the man who rode through fame's fire and came out whole. What do you think of Wilcox's journey? Does it change how you see Chips? Share your thoughts below. Hit the like button and subscribe for more stories that peel back the curtain on Hollywood's truths. Ring the bell. You won't want to miss what's next.
Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more dives into Hollywood's hidden history.